All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to be exploring some fascinating aspects of Philippine criminal law,
That's right.
specifically crimes against persons and property.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at the revised penal code of the Philippines and,
Some interesting stuff in there.
oh yeah, this code, it gets really into the nitty-gritty.
It does. It's very detailed.
When it comes to defining these crimes, it's not just a simple, oh, you assaulted somebody or you stole something.
No, not at all.
It really breaks things down into different levels of severity and intent.
Right.
And we're going to try to unpack some of that today.
Yeah, you might be surprised to learn just how specific this code gets,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to physical injuries. Like, how bad does the injury have to be to qualify as a serious crime?
So, like, if somebody gets hurt, it's not just assault. There are different categories.
Exactly. The code actually categorizes physical injuries into serious physical injury, less serious, and slight.
So how do they determine that?
Well, they have specific criteria they look at.
Give us some examples.
Okay, so for instance, the code looks at things like how long the victim couldn't work their usual job because of the injury.
Okay.
Like if someone's injury keeps them out of work for over 90 days, that could be considered serious physical injury territory.
Wow, that's a long time to be out of work.
It is.
90 days. That's really emphasizing the long-term impact of the injury.
Absolutely. It's not just about the immediate pain,
Yeah.
but also the potential disruption to someone's livelihood.
Right, absolutely.
But physical harm is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right.
The code also dives into some complex and sensitive territory, like rape.
Okay, so speaking of rape, the Philippine law,
This is where it gets interesting.
it distinguishes between two modes of it, sexual intercourse and sexual assault.
Exactly.
And each one has its own set of criteria.
Right. And one of the most significant changes in recent years
Yeah.
is the impact of Republic Act 11648, which was passed in 2022. This act raised the age of consent for statutory rape to 16 years old.
Okay, so
That's
these
a
are
big step.
key
Yeah, a big step in protecting minors.
in protecting minors.
What about consent in general?
Well,
How do they define when someone is truly capable of giving consent?
the code specifically addresses situations where a victim might be deprived of reason or unconscious.
Okay.
So basically, they're not in a state to make a clear, informed decision.
Right. So like alcohol, drugs, or any situation where somebody might not be able to fully grasp what's happening.
Exactly.
But what about those more complex situations?
Yeah, where it gets a little tricky.
Like where there's pressure?
yeah.
consent.
Well, that's where things get a bit tricky. Because you see, the Philippine legal system also has concepts like the sweetheart doctrine and marital rape,
Oh, interesting.
which add layers of complexity to the issue of consent.
Okay, so those are probably topics for another deep dive.
Absolutely. Maybe we can explore those another time.
Yeah.
For sure.
But for now, let's move on to another crime that can have really serious consequences.
Yeah.
Kidnapping and illegal detention.
Okay, so kidnapping and illegal detention.
The code actually breaks this down further
Okay.
into serious illegal detention and slight illegal detention.
So there are levels to this as well.
Yes, think of serious illegal detention as having extra layers of harm.
Okay, give us some examples.
It could involve things like the detention lasting more than 3 days, the perpetrator pretending to be an authority figure, or inflicting serious harm on the victim.
That's some scary stuff.
Yeah.
So slight illegal detention lacks those aggravating factors.
Precisely.
Okay.
But here's something you might find surprising.
Okay.
In the Philippines, actually locking someone up in a room isn't strictly necessary for it to be considered kidnapping.
Wait, really? So I could kidnap someone
You could.
and not actually lock them up?
That's right. The key element is the lack of freedom to leave.
Uh.
If someone's liberty is restrained, even without physical barriers, it could still fall under kidnapping, according to Philippine law.
So it's really about restricting their movement.
Exactly. And when we talk about kidnapping, there are some chilling qualifying circumstances that could even lead to the death penalty.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like what? I'm guessing like demanding ransom?
Ransom, that's one. and if the victim is killed during the kidnapping.
Yeah, okay.
But the code also lists rape and torture as qualifying circumstances that could result in the most severe punishment.
That's intense. So they really take crimes against personal liberty very seriously.
Absolutely.
And that concern extends to minors as well, right?
Absolutely. The code dedicates specific articles 275, 276, and 277
Okay.
to detail various acts of child abandonment that are punishable by law.
Okay.
In fact, did you know that in the Philippines, a parent could face legal consequences for neglecting their child's education?
Really? Neglecting their education,
Yeah.
like not sending them to school?
Yes. The code considers the family's social standing and financial situation.
Okay.
So if a parent can afford to send their child to school,
Right.
but chooses not to,
Mm-hmm.
they could be held accountable.
So it's really about them being able to provide it,
Exactly.
but choosing not to.
It's a form of neglect in their eyes.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's not just about the act itself, but
It's about the context.
yeah, the context around it.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then when it comes to child abandonment,
Yeah.
the law also makes a distinction between abandonment and intent to kill, right?
Right. Even if a child is abandoned and tragically passes away, the parent isn't automatically assumed to have intended to kill them.
So you're saying even in that situation,
You have to prove intent.
they would have to prove intent to kill.
You got it.
That's kind of surprising.
It is. But let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about another area where the code gets incredibly specific. Crimes against property.
All right, so let's talk about property crime.
Let's start with robbery.
Okay, robbery.
The code outlines the core elements of robbery as the unlawful taking of someone else's personal property using violence, intimidation, or force.
Okay.
And of course, there has to be the intent to gain something from the act.
Right, so you're taking it for yourself.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing there are levels of robbery?
You're absolutely right.
It's not all treated the same.
The code distinguishes between simple robbery and robbery with violence.
Okay, and that's where it gets a little more serious.
Much more serious.
So what kind of situations would bump a robbery up to that robbery with violence level?
We're talking homicide, rape, arson, serious physical injuries. Basically, any of those happening by reason or on occasion of the robbery.
Okay, so if any of those things happen during the robbery,
It becomes a much more serious crime.
wow. But would they be charged separately?
That's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
In a case like that, the other crime could be absorbed into the charge of robbery with homicide, creating a single more serious charge.
So like if a rape occurred during the robbery, it would be robbery with homicide.
It'd be absorbed into that.
But the rape wouldn't be ignored.
It wouldn't be ignored.
It would just be part of that.
Part of a larger, more complex crime.
Okay, I see. And then the penalties for attempted or frustrated robbery with homicide
Those can vary significantly,
can also vary.
depending on the details of the case.
Interesting. So it's not just black and white.
Not at all.
It depends on a lot of different factors.
Many factors.
Okay, well, one thing I found really interesting is that the code specifically says there's no such thing as robbery with attempted rape.
That's right.
It only applies if the rape is completed.
The law requires the act of rape to be fully carried out
Interesting.
for it to factor into the robbery charge.
Okay, and speaking of robbery, we've got the concept of a band.
Yes, the robbery crew.
The robbery crew. So if a group of people commit a robbery,
Let's say 5 of them.
are they all equally liable, even if only one of them actually takes the goods?
That's a great question, and the answer might surprise you. The code states that all members of a band involved in a robbery can be held liable, even if they didn't all physically participate in the act itself.
Wow, so just being part of the gang
Being part of the gang is enough.
is enough to share in the criminal responsibility.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so now let's move on from the high-stakes world of robbery
Okay.
to its less glamorous cousin,
Theft. Simple theft.
theft. So,
While robbery involves that element of force or intimidation,
right.
theft is more about sneaky, under-the-radar actions.
Neat.
Yeah, the Philippine law defines a whole range of acts that can fall under theft, including something as seemingly harmless as finding lost property and deciding to keep it.
Wait, seriously?
Seriously.
Like if I find a wallet on the street
And you don't try to return it.
and I just keep it,
That's considered theft.
I could be committing theft.
Yes. The code considers it a form of unlawful taking if you don't make a reasonable effort to return the lost property to its rightful owner
Wow. Okay, I did not know that.
or to the authorities.
So I'm going to have to be more careful about that from now on.
You should be.
But theft, I'm assuming it doesn't just stop at simple theft. There's got to be more to it.
Of course, just like with robbery, there's also qualified theft.
Okay, so qualified theft, meaning there are factors that make it more serious.
Exactly. Special circumstances that bump up the severity of the crime.
Okay, so what are some examples of those circumstances?
Well, for example, if a domestic servant commits the theft,
Okay.
it's automatically considered qualified theft.
Okay, so if you have somebody working in your home
Right.
and they steal from you,
It's considered much more serious.
it's qualified theft,
Because there's that element of trust,
right? A betrayal of trust.
the trail of trust.
Okay, what other situations would fall under qualified theft?
Well, grave abuse of confidence is another big one.
Okay.
So if someone steals from their employer or someone they have a close, trusting relationship with,
Yeah.
that would likely be considered qualified theft.
It's not just about what's stolen. It's about the relationship.
It's the relationship as well.
Okay, but does the type of property ever matter
in
determining if it's qualified?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what are some examples of that?
There are certain types of property that, if stolen, automatically trigger that qualified theft classification.
Okay.
We're talking motor vehicles, large cattle, even coconuts taken directly from plantations. Apparently, those are serious business in the Philippines.
Coconuts? Wow.
Coconuts are a big deal.
You learn something new every day.
You do.
Okay, so we're really getting a crash course in just how specific and detailed this Philippine criminal code is.
Very specific.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
We've just begun.
So what's fascinating to me is how the code balances protecting people and their possessions.
Right. It goes to great lengths to define the nuances of each crime,
Right.
outlining different scenarios and levels of severity.
It's like a legal puzzle, trying to piece together all the elements to determine the appropriate response to each crime.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling.
Yeah.
It's a glimpse into a legal system that takes a meticulous approach to defining and punishing criminal offenses.
It's been an eye-opening experience for me so far, and I hope it has been for you too, listener.
Me too.
But hold on tight, because we've still got a lot more legal ground to cover.
We'll be back in a flash
We'll be right back.
to uncover more fascinating aspects of the Philippine Criminal Code.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. And as we dig deeper into this code, we encounter some pretty intriguing concepts,
Okay.
like the difference between juridical possession and material possession.
Okay, those sound a little complicated.
Yeah, they're kind of legalese terms.
Break it down for us. What's the difference?
Okay, so think of material possession as simply having something in your hands.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
you're holding it, you're using it, but you might not necessarily have the legal right to it.
Okay, so like if I borrow a friend's car,
Exactly.
I have material possession of it,
You do.
but it's not legally mine.
Exactly. Now, juridical possession is more about having the legal right to possess something, even if you don't physically have it at that moment.
Okay.
It's a more abstract concept of ownership.
So even though the car's in my driveway, my friend still has juridical possession.
They do, because they're the rightful owner.
Because they're the owner.
Yes. And this distinction plays a crucial role in certain types of qualified theft, especially when dealing with things like financial transactions or entrusted goods.
I bet that can lead to some messy legal battles.
Oh, absolutely. Trying to figure out who had what kind of possession
Right.
when a theft occurred.
But let's move on to another fascinating aspect of the code.
Okay.
Trespassing.
Trespassing.
You might be surprised to learn that it's not just about hopping a fence.
No. Not in the Philippines.
The Philippine law gets very specific
Very specific.
about the different types of trespassing.
Right. The code distinguishes between trespass to dwelling and other forms of trespass.
Okay, trespass to dwelling sounds serious.
It is. It's specifically about entering someone's home against their will.
So breaking into someone's house.
Exactly. And if you use violence or intimidation to get in, it becomes qualified trespass to dwelling,
Okay.
which carries much harsher penalties.
So they really take breaking into someone's house very seriously?
They do. It's seen as a violation of their personal space.
Right, their sanctuary.
Their sanctuary, exactly. But the law also recognizes other forms of trespass,
Okay.
like entering closed premises or fenced-off properties that aren't inhabited.
So like exploring an abandoned building?
Potentially, yes, especially if there are signs prohibiting entry
Got it.
and you don't have permission from the owner.
No trespassing for me.
Probably a good idea.
But what about situations where someone threatens harm but doesn't actually do anything?
Yes. The code also delves into the world of threats,
Okay.
distinguishing between grave threats and light threats.
Okay, break it down for us.
The difference lies in the nature of the threat itself, whether the threatened act would actually be a crime.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, if I threaten to spread rumors about someone, that would be a light threat
Okay.
because it's not technically a crime.
Right.
But if I threaten to, say, vandalize their property,
Yeah.
that would be a grave threat because it is a crime.
Okay, so it depends on whether the threatened act
Is a crime itself.
is a crime itself, and the penalties
Reflect that
are
difference.
different for each.
Grave threats, especially those made in writing or through a third party, have much more serious consequences.
Those kinds of threats can be really scary.
Absolutely.
So what about, like, those arguments that get out of hand?
Yeah.
Like if somebody makes a threat in the heat of the moment.
Well, the law also recognizes a category called other light threats,
Okay.
which covers things like threatening someone with a weapon during an argument or making verbal threats in the heat of the moment.
So even those heated arguments
Could have legal repercussions,
could have legal repercussions.
especially if someone feels genuinely threatened.
That's good to know. I'll try to keep my cool from now on.
Probably a good idea for all of us.
But let's move on from threats, shall we?
Sounds good.
And talk about coercion, which is basically forcing someone to do something they don't want to do.
Right. And once again, we see the distinction between grave coercion and light coercion.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here.
There's a lot of nuance in this code.
So what are the differences between those two?
Grave coercion usually involves violence, threats, or intimidation to prevent someone from doing something lawful or to force them to do something against their will.
So things like physically restraining someone or threatening them with harm?
Exactly. And the code emphasizes that the threat has to be believable, immediate, and something the person could actually carry out.
Right, it can't just be some empty threat.
Right. Light coercion, on the other hand, often involves more subtle forms of pressure or manipulation.
Okay, so if I'm constantly nagging my friend to go to a party they don't want to go to,
That's more of a light coercion situation.
annoying, but not a crime. Okay, are there any specific acts that are considered light coercion?
Yes. The code gives an example of a creditor using force to seize a debtor's belongings to cover a debt.
So even though debt collection is a legitimate process, there are limits on how far they can go.
Exactly.
Okay, and lastly, what about unjust vexation?
Yes. Unjust vexation basically covers any act that annoys, irritates, or disturbs someone without a good reason.
So like those prank calls or playing loud music late at night?
Those could definitely fall under this category, especially if they're done repeatedly and intentionally to cause distress.
So it's all about intent again.
Intent plays a big role.
Okay, so it sounds like the Philippine Criminal Code is really comprehensive
It is.
in protecting individuals from harm.
It covers a wide range of offenses, drawing clear lines between different levels of severity and intent.
And it really highlights the importance of being mindful of our actions and how they might affect others.
Absolutely, even in those seemingly minor situations where we might not think we're doing anything wrong.
It's a good reminder that the law is all around us, shaping our interactions and setting boundaries for acceptable behavior.
Well said. And speaking of boundaries,
Yes.
we're about to cross one ourselves, the boundary between this part of our deep dive
Uh-oh.
and the next one.
Okay, cliffhanger.
But don't worry, we're not going anywhere just yet.
Okay, good.
We've got plenty more fascinating legal territory to explore in the revised penal code.
Okay, so stay tuned.
We'll be back in a flash.
Okay, so are you ready for some real-life legal drama?
Always.
Because in this final part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
we're going to explore some cases
Yeah.
that show how these laws actually play out
Fascinating stuff.
in the Philippine courtrooms.
It is, these cases aren't just about legal technicalities.
Right.
They offer a glimpse into the human stories behind the law,
Yeah.
and how it impacts people's lives.
All right, so let's hear about some of these cases.
Well, one case that really stood out to me involved a man named Alan Siskar.
Okay.
He was accused of raping a woman, but his defense was pretty surprising.
Oh.
He argued that he couldn't have possibly committed the crime
Okay.
in the location where it allegedly happened
Okay.
because it was a public area in their residential home.
So he's saying it was too public.
He claimed that someone would have seen or heard something.
So basically, he's trying to say that rape can only happen in secluded areas.
Pretty much, yeah.
That seems like a pretty weak defense.
It is.
Did it work?
No, the Supreme Court wasn't buying it.
Okay.
Justice Amy Lazaro Javier, who was presiding over the case, upheld his conviction
Okay.
and emphasized that rape can happen anywhere, anytime.
Wow.
She even pointed out that there have been cases of rape occurring in crowded places, parks, schools,
Sure.
even inside homes, with other people present.
So it doesn't matter where it happens?
Exactly. The location itself doesn't diminish the severity of the act.
That's a powerful statement from the court.
It is. It really shows that they're taking a firm stance against this kind of victim-blaming argument.
Absolutely. But let's move on to a case that highlights the importance of proving the elements of a crime.
Okay.
This one involved a man named Philip Carrion,
Okay.
who was accused of serious illegal detention.
Ah, yes, the carry-on case. This one's interesting
Yeah.
because it shows how legal cases often hinge on the specifics of the evidence presented.
Okay.
In this case, the prosecution had a tough time proving that carry-on had actually restricted the victim's freedom of movement.
So even if he might have wanted to keep the victim there,
Right.
he didn't physically prevent them from leaving.
That seems to have been the issue.
Interesting.
Justice Lazaro Javier, who was also presiding over this case,
Okay.
acquitted carry-on.
Wow.
She stated that for serious illegal detention to stick,
Yeah.
there has to be clear evidence of the victim's liberty being taken away,
Right.
not just the desire or intent to detain someone.
So you can't punish someone for their thoughts.
Exactly. There has to be concrete action involved.
Okay. But let's move on to another case that shows just how complex these legal proceedings can get.
Okay.
Have you heard of the Danelle Umel case?
Yes, the Umel case is a particularly disturbing one
Yeah.
because it involves multiple serious charges intertwined
Oh.
in a single case.
So what happened in the Umel case?
Umel was ultimately convicted of robbery with rape.
Okay.
The victim testified that he threatened her with a gun
Oh, wow.
and forced her into sexual acts while robbing her.
That's terrible. So he basically committed 2 crimes at once.
He did.
What did the court say about that?
The court, with Justice Lazaro Javier delivering the decision once again,
Okay.
was very clear that both the robbery and the rape needed to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay.
They carefully established each element of the crime, showing that property was taken through violence and intimidation,
Right.
that it belonged to someone else, that there was intent to gain from the act, and that the act of rape itself occurred.
So they really had to break it all down.
They did. It was a very thorough process.
Wow, that's a lot to process in one case.
It is.
But it really shows how meticulous the Philippine legal system is.
It does. It highlights the meticulous approach that they take
Yeah.
in handling these kinds of serious offenses.
And it seems like Justice Lazaro Javier has really played a key role
She has.
in shaping how these laws are interpreted.
Her decisions have set important precedents
Yeah.
that clarify the boundaries of these crimes
Right.
and emphasize the need for strong evidence and a thorough understanding of the legal nuances.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We've decoded legal jargon,
Yeah.
untangles complex concepts, and even stepped into the shoes of judges and lawyers.
It's been quite a journey,
Yes.
exploring the ins and outs of the Philippine Criminal Code.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
what's fascinating here is that this code isn't just a dusty old book of rules. It's a living, breathing system that reflects the values of Philippine society and its commitment to protecting individuals and their property.
It's been really interesting to see how the law impacts every aspect of our lives.
It does, even in ways we might not always realize.
Absolutely. And as a final thought for our listeners,
I guess.
remember that laws are constantly evolving.
They are. They adapt to new challenges,
Right.
reflect changing societal norms,
Mm.
and are shaped by court decisions and legislative actions.
So the exploration never really ends.
It doesn't. There's always more to learn, more to question,
Yeah.
and more to understand about the legal landscape that surrounds us.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Philippine criminal law.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we'll be looking at 181.210.pdf.
Touchy title.
Yeah, right. But don't worry, it's more interesting than it sounds. We're going to be going through the Philippine Criminal Code, specifically Book 2.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we'll be looking at everything from protecting national treasures to the world of estafa, which is...
Ooh, Esifa.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Are you ready to get into some of this?
Absolutely. I think there are going to be some surprises in here for sure.
Yeah.
For our listeners, but also for us.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so to start off, we have Article 311, which deals with theft from the National Library and the National Museum.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
what do you think about that?
I think it makes sense to have separate laws for that because these are really important institutions for the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
They have so much history and culture.
Yeah.
Like if you think about it, someone trying to steal some centuries-old artifact, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
And I think Article 311 is basically saying, like, don't mess with our heritage.
Exactly. Hands off. So moving on, we have Article 312, which deals with land disputes.
Ah, yes.
Let's-
Land grabbing Filipino style.
Yes. Land grabbing Filipino style.
But this isn't just about, like, who owns what piece of land, right?
Right.
Because obviously arguments over land can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
But the Philippines has specific laws to make sure that these arguments don't get out of hand.
Oh, okay. So it's not enough to just claim the land. You have to do it peacefully.
Exactly.
Got it.
So Article 312 kind of looks at occupation of real property.
Okay.
But it says that if there's any violence or intimidation involved,
Hmm.
then it becomes a much more serious offense.
Okay.
It's really about protecting people from threats or force when it comes to property.
So it's really focused on keeping things peaceful and orderly.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And speaking of respecting boundaries,
Yes.
we have Article 313, which is altering boundaries or landmarks.
So you're saying I can't just, like, adjust my fence a little bit?
Potentially not. I mean, the interesting thing is with this one, you don't even have to be trying to gain anything.
Oh, wow.
So, like, even if it's a seemingly harmless adjustment,
Huh.
messing with the established boundaries, like no in the Philippines.
I guess those landmarks hold, like, a deeper significance than I realized.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a place with such a rich history,
Yeah.
strong community ties, like the Philippines. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to something completely different,
Okay, hit me.
which is Article 315.
Okay.
This is the world of estafa.
Ooh, estafa.
Yeah, have you heard of this word before?
I have, but I'm not sure I can really define it.
Yeah, me neither. So basically, it's this word
Okay.
that covers, like, a lot more than just regular fraud.
Okay.
So it can be, like, shady business deals
Okay.
or using, like, false pretenses to trick someone
Yeah.
out of their money.
So, like, it's not just stealing something, it's like using trickery to get it.
Exactly. So the source material that we have actually has some good examples to illustrate this.
Okay, tell me more.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say there's a contractor and they promise to use high quality materials for whatever you're building,
Okay.
but then they actually use, like, cheaper materials.
Classic. It happens all the time.
But so in the Philippines, this is considered estafa.
Wow.
Yeah. And then another example is, let's say someone is trying to make a deal,
Okay.
and to convince the other person, they say that they have powerful government connections,
Uh-huh.
but it turns out that they don't.
Shady.
Yeah, and this is also considered estafa.
Wow.
So basically,
So it's really about trying to protect people from being taken advantage of.
exactly, whether it's by, like, a shady contractor or, like, a smooth-talking con artist,
Yeah.
the law is like, we're not going to let you get away with it.
We see you.
We see you. But I do have to ask, like, is every little white lie considered estafa?
That's a good question.
Like,
I would say probably not. I think the key thing here is this intent to deceive someone for your own personal gain.
okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about a situation where, let's say someone tries to pass off, like, lower quality goods as, like, the real deal?
Okay.
Like, in the source material, there's this example of a rice seller
Yes.
who substitutes, like, inferior rice.
Right, and that's a classic example of estafa.
Okay.
And I think even though it might seem like a minor offense,
Yeah.
it actually highlights a really important point,
Yeah.
which is that estafa laws are really there to protect consumers from dishonest business practices.
Especially with an essential good like rice.
Exactly.
Right. You don't want to mess with someone's rice.
You don't mess with the rice.
It's so important.
It's a staple food.
Yeah.
People rely on that.
Exactly.
Yep.
So estafa is really about protecting people from just, like, getting ripped off, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay, cool. So moving on, we have Article 315 2D, which specifically deals with bounced checks.
Okay. The dreaded bounce check.
The dreaded bounce check. More than just a banking headache.
It can be more than a banking headache in the Philippines.
The Philippines.
It carries some pretty serious legal weight.
Okay.
The law calls it prima facie evidence of deceit.
Oh, wow.
So basically that means if your check bounces,
Mm-hmm.
it's assumed that you were being intentionally deceitful,
Oh, wow.
unless you can prove otherwise.
So it's kind of like guilty until proven innocent
Yeah, exactly.
with a bounce check.
Yeah, and I think that really makes a statement about financial responsibility.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's serious.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's another interesting example of estafa that I wanted to point out,
Okay.
which is in Article 315 2E.
Okay.
And this one deals with obtaining food or accommodation without paying.
Ooh, like the dine and dash.
Yes, like the dine and dash,
Okay.
but with legal implications.
Right. So it's not just about like sneaking out of a restaurant.
Right.
This is about intentionally deceiving a business to get free stuff. Free meals, free lodging.
I bet this is especially relevant in a country with like a big tourism industry like the Philippines.
Yeah, they want to protect their businesses from
Yeah,
people who are trying to take advantage.
exactly.
So yeah, hotel hustle. Not so fast.
Not so fast. Okay, so now let's move from scams to something much more serious. Arson.
Oh, okay.
So we have Articles 320 and PD 1613.
Okay.
And these outline the different degrees of arson.
Huh?
So we have simple arson and destructive arson.
Okay.
And the distinction is really important.
Okay, so help me understand this. Like, what makes arson destructive?
Okay, so think of it like the simple arson might involve burning someone else's property, or like even your own property in a way that endangers others.
Okay.
But destructive arson is like a whole other level.
So, like, what kind of situations are we talking about here?
So imagine someone burns down a building to cover up evidence of a crime,
Oh, wow.
or to defraud creditors.
Oh.
Or like imagine a fire is set in a crowded public market or like a transportation hub.
Right, so the potential for harm is just much greater.
Exactly. And so the punishments for destructive arson are also way more serious.
Okay, so it's not just about setting a fire, it's about the intent behind it and the potential consequences.
Exactly. So speaking of destructive behavior, but on like a smaller scale,
Okay.
we have Article 327, which covers malicious mischief.
Malicious mischief.
Yeah, it sounds like a cartoon villain.
It does.
But basically, this is about intentionally damaging someone's property just for the sake of causing damage.
Mm.
And often it's driven by things like revenge or just pure spite.
Really?
Yeah, and this is different from theft, because with theft, the goal is to gain something.
Right.
But with malicious mischief, it's purely about causing harm.
So the intent really matters.
Exactly. It's not just about what happened, but like why it happened.
That's so interesting.
Okay, so now let's move on to the section of the code that deals with crimes against chastity and family.
Okay.
And we have Articles 333 through 346.
That's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But basically, this covers adultery, concubinage, seduction, abduction, acts of lasciviousness.
Okay, so we're talking about laws that are designed to protect personal honor,
Yes.
family integrity.
Exactly.
Okay.
And these laws are complicated, but they show a deep concern for protecting family relationships.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things about this section is that in cases of adultery and concubinage,
Yeah.
the offended spouse actually has to file a complaint for legal action to be taken.
So it's not just up to the authorities to pursue charges.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then another interesting twist is that in some cases, if the offender marries the victim,
Uh-huh.
the criminal liability can be completely extinguished.
Wow, so it's kind of like an incentive for reconciliation?
Yeah. So it seems like the law is trying to balance protecting individual honor, but also recognizing that there is the possibility of healing within the family.
Right, it's not always about punishment. It's
Yeah.
about acknowledging the complexities of relationships.
Yeah.
But I do think it's worth noting that while rape used to be categorized under this section, it's now considered a crime against persons,
That makes sense.
which I think shows a broader societal shift
Yeah.
in how we understand the severity of that offense.
Yeah. It's not a family matter. It's a violation of someone's rights.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about something that might sound a bit like a soap opera plot.
Okay, tell me more.
Faking a birth?
Wait, is that really a crime?
Yes.
In the Philippines?
Yes, in the Philippines. Article 347
Okay.
penalizes stimulating births, substituting children, concealing or abandoning a child
Wow.
to impact their civil status.
So it's not just a dramatic storyline. This is like a real thing.
Yes. So it's not just about creating a false identity.
Mhm.
It's about like disrupting someone's legal standing and potentially causing chaos in their life.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it shows how important like accurate birth records are
Yeah.
for establishing someone's identity
Huge.
and legal rights. Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about bigamy.
Okay. The classic tale of having more than one spouse.
Exactly. And of course, it's not just a plot twist, it is a crime.
Of course.
And this is outlined in Article 349.
Okay.
And there's a really interesting legal history here.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I found interesting is that there's been this recent shift
Yeah.
regarding void marriages as a valid defense
So basically,
from bigamy.
if your previous marriage wasn't actually legal,
Yeah.
then you might not be guilty of bigamy.
Exactly. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, I didn't know I was still married.
Right. There are legal gray areas.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Okay, so, and then while we're talking about marital complexities, we have Article 350,
Okay.
which tackles marriages contracted against the provisions of the law.
Okay, so this is about situations where someone might accidentally enter into a marriage that's not legally valid.
That's part of it, but the main focus is really on the offender's knowledge of the legal requirements or impediments to marriage.
Oh. So did they know that they weren't allowed to get married?
Yeah, exactly.
Were they coerced or was there fraud involved?
Right, so it really comes down to informed consent.
Yes. Making sure people are fully aware of the legal side of marriage.
Exactly.
Before they say, I do.
Exactly. Okay, so let's move on to something that's often in the news, which is libel.
Libel, oh boy.
Yeah, so this is covered in Article 353
Great.
of the Philippine Criminal Code.
Okay.
And it's kind of a hot topic in Philippine law.
It seems like, I mean, it could be a complicated topic, right?
Yeah.
Like you would think, okay, I can't spread lies about someone.
Right.
But what if it's technically true,
Yeah.
but you're saying it in a way to make them look bad?
Right. Or what if you're targeting like a company
Yeah.
or even like a dead person?
Oh, you can libel a dead person?
You can, but there are specific rules.
Okay.
Like it has to be proven that the statement actually damaged their reputation
Okay.
and like potentially harmed their heirs or something.
Wow.
So yeah, it gets really complicated.
It does.
And actually, the source material we have
Yeah.
gives some really interesting examples of how libel is determined in Philippine courts,
Oh, cool.
taking into account like context and interpretation and the possibility of even group libel.
So it's not just about the words themselves. It's about how those words are used
Exactly.
and how they're interpreted.
Right. And one interesting detail from the source material is that sending a sealed letter is not considered publication
Oh, wow.
for libel.
So it has to be public.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that adds another layer of complexity
Definitely.
to like what libel actually is.
Okay.
Okay, so what about truth as a defense?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Like, if you can prove something is true.
Yeah, does that get you off the hook?
Yeah. That's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
So Article 361, Proof of Truth, outlines the conditions where truth is admissible as a defense.
Okay.
But there's a catch.
Okay.
You don't just have to prove that the statement is true.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to show that you had good motives
Oh.
and justifiable ends.
So even if you're stating facts, if your intention is to harm someone, it could still be libel.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just about the accuracy of what you're saying.
Right.
It's about the ethics of it
Right.
and why you said it.
So it's about responsible communication.
Yes. All right, that.
Okay, so last but not least, we have blackmail,
Blackmail.
which is covered in Article 356.
Okay.
And this article is titled, Threatening to Publish and Offer to Prevent Such Publication for a Compensation.
Okay, so this is where libel meets extortion.
Exactly.
It's not just about damaging someone's reputation. You're using that as leverage
Exactly.
to get something.
It's a reminder that information is power,
It is
and it can be used as a weapon.
a dangerous one.
And the law takes that threat very seriously.
Yes, and it just shows the complexity of these seemingly simple legal concepts.
Right.
Like there's always more beneath the surface.
Yeah, this has been fascinating.
I know, I'm learning so much.
Me too. We've covered a lot of ground here, from theft and land disputes to fraud, arson, and even libel.
It's amazing.
And it's really amazing to see how these laws reflect the values and concerns of Filipino society.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface of the Philippine Criminal Code.
I know there's so much more to explore.
There is so much more to explore.
Yeah, but for now we're going to take a break, and when we come back,
Yes.
we'll be diving even deeper into this fascinating topic.
Can't wait.
Stay tuned.
Okay. Wow, it really feels like we just went on like a whirlwind tour
I know, right?
of Filipino values through the lens of the law.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating how all of these articles we talked about like really reveal so much about what matters to Filipino society.
Absolutely. We've seen how the law protects things like national treasures, upholds fairness in business dealings,
Yeah.
safeguards like personal honor and family relationships.
It's not just these like abstract rules.
Yeah.
It's about creating like a framework for a just and peaceful society.
You've hit the nail on the head. Like, for instance, think about the articles on theft from like the national treasures,
Yes.
land grabbing,
Yeah.
even like altering boundaries.
Right.
They all point to this like importance of respecting property rights.
Yes, both individual and collective.
Exactly. And then we have like estafa,
Right.
which like goes beyond just stealing to cover all these ways that people can be tricked and
Yes.
deceived.
That's for personal gain.
Yeah, it's like the law is saying we value honesty and transparency,
Yes.
and we're going to hold you accountable for your action.
Whether it's through like a shady business deal or a bounced check,
Right.
or even like substituting lower quality rice.
Exactly. It's all about ensuring fairness
Yes.
and accountability.
In everyday transactions.
Okay, so what about the sections on crimes against chastity and family?
Okay. Yeah, those are really interesting
Yeah.
because they seem to touch on some like deeply held cultural values.
Yeah, they do. And I think even though they're complicated, these articles show a concern.
Yes.
For safeguarding personal honor and like the integrity of family relationships.
And it's interesting how the law kind of navigates those sensitive areas,
Yeah.
often requiring the involvement of the offended spouse,
Right.
and even like recognizing that possibility of reconciliation
Yeah.
as a way to extinguish criminal liability.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about violating some abstract rule.
Right.
It's about disrupting
Yes.
the fabric of the family and community.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I think it's also important to note that
Yeah.
rape used to be categorized under this section,
Oh, okay.
but it's now considered a crime against persons.
Right.
Which I think shows a really significant evolution in our understanding
Yeah.
of that offense.
It's not about family matters. It's about someone's individual rights.
Exactly. It's a violation of a
Remember saying-
person's safety and rights.
Exactly. Okay, so speaking of evolving understandings, we have those articles on faking births
Right.
and bigamy.
Yes.
And those highlight like the complexities.
Yes. Of marriage and identity.
It's not just about love and commitment.
Yeah.
There are legal contracts involved.
Exactly. And there can be serious consequences
Absolutely.
when those contracts are broken or manipulated.
And they kind of expose how vulnerable
Yeah.
legal systems are to deception
Yeah.
and highlight the need for safeguards to make sure everything is accurate and fair.
Okay, so now let's talk about libel,
Libel.
which is fascinating because it touches on freedom of expression,
Yeah.
but also like the right to protect your reputation.
It's a tricky balancing act.
It is. Like, how do you allow open discussion and debate, but prevent the spread of harmful falsehoods?
You've hit the nail on the head. It's a delicate balance, and the Philippines definitely tries
Yeah.
to navigate that complexity.
Especially in Article 353.
Yeah, they really consider not just the words themselves, but also like the intent behind them.
Right.
The impact and the overall context.
And even if a statement is true, the law recognizes that it could still be used to defame someone. Yeah, especially if your intention is malicious.
Right.
It's about responsible communication.
Yeah.
Even when you're dealing with like truths
Yes.
that are maybe unflattering or controversial.
It reminds me of that saying, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
Well, that's a good one.
Okay, so, and then finally we have blackmail,
Blackmail.
which combines the harm of libel
Right.
with the threat of extortion.
Yeah. It's a reminder that information can be weaponized
Yeah.
and used against people.
And that's a serious offense.
It is.
So we've seen all these laws and how they connect to this broader picture of Filipino society.
It's fascinating.
It is. Like,
Yeah.
what stands out to you as the most, like, surprising or intriguing aspect of all of this?
That's a great question. I think what really struck me
Yeah.
is how the law reflects the Filipino emphasis on community
Okay.
and interpersonal harmony.
Interesting.
Like so many of these articles seem to be about preventing conflict,
Uh-huh.
making sure things are fair,
Right.
promoting peaceful resolutions.
You're right. There's a definite prioritization of social stability
Yes.
and respect for established norms.
And even the laws that deal with like seemingly individual offenses like libel,
Right.
malicious mischief,
Yeah.
they ultimately connect back to this idea of protecting the collective good.
It's like a legal reflection of that Bayanihan spirit,
Yes.
that Filipino concept of communal unity and cooperation.
Exactly. It's so fascinating to see how these cultural values
Yeah.
like manifest in the legal system.
It's like we uncovered this hidden layer of meaning
Yes.
in these like seemingly dry legal texts.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that the law is never really separate
Yeah.
from the culture it serves.
Okay, so we've explored all these specific laws and values.
Yeah.
What does it all mean for someone who's not a legal expert?
That's a good question.
Like, why should they care about all of this?
Well, I think it's important to remember that law is not just about rules and punishments.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how a society functions.
Oh.
So learning about the Philippine Criminal Code gives you a glimpse into the Filipino mindset,
Yeah.
what they value, what they condemn, and how they approach justice.
It's like a window into their cultural soul.
I like that.
And whether you're planning a trip or doing business there
Right.
or just interested in learning more about the world,
Yeah.
this knowledge can be so valuable.
It can help you navigate social interactions,
Yeah.
understand cultural nuances,
Yeah.
and appreciate the complexities of a society that might be different from your own.
It's about developing cultural intelligence.
Absolutely, which is essential in today's world.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that law isn't just this set of abstract rules.
Right.
It's a reflection of a people's values
Yeah.
and their vision
Yes.
of a just and orderly society.
This deep dive has definitely changed my perspective
Me too.
on criminal law.
Yeah, it's not just about catching criminals.
Right.
It's about understanding the values and principles
Yeah.
that make up a society.
Well said. Wow, it's amazing how much we learned just from this one section
Right.
of the Philippine Criminal Code.
So much.
Who knew criminal law could be so insightful?
Right. It's like we peeled back the layers of this legal onion and found all of this
Yeah.
cultural and historical context.
Yeah. And for someone like me who's not a legal expert,
Right.
it's been so eye-opening to see how these laws reflect Filipino values,
Yeah,
like family, community, respect for property and tradition.
absolutely. And it really challenges the idea that
Yeah.
law is just this set of dry rules. It shows how it's connected to everyday life,
Right.
how people interact, resolve conflicts, build community.
It's made me realize that understanding a country's legal system is like
Yeah,
understanding its people
it is.
on a deeper level.
Especially in a place like the Philippines,
Yeah.
where those cultural nuances
Yeah.
play such a big role
Yeah.
in communication and interactions.
So if you're listening to this
Yeah.
and you've ever wondered what makes Filipino society tick,
Right.
this deep dive into the criminal code is a great place to start.
Yeah, you can learn about the values they uphold, the
Yeah.
behaviors they condemn,
Right.
the principles that guide their pursuit of justice.
It's like a crash course
It is
in Filipino culture.
disguised as a legal exploration.
I love that. It's about going beyond the surface and discovering
Yes.
those deeper layers of meaning
Those deeper layers.
that shape a society.
And you never know.
Yeah.
This knowledge might come in handy someday.
Right.
Maybe you're planning a trip to the Philippines.
Yeah.
Or you're working with Filipino colleagues.
Yeah.
Understanding their legal system
Yeah.
can help you navigate those cross-cultural interactions.
It's about building bridges.
It is.
Of understanding
And appreciating.
and appreciating the richness and diversity of legal systems around the world.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Philippine Criminal Code, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that law isn't just about punishment.
Yeah.
It's about understanding a society's values
Yeah.
and their vision for a just and harmonious community.
And the Philippine Criminal Code, with its focus on family and property
Yes.
and social stability,
Right.
offers a fascinating glimpse
It does.
into the Filipino worldview.
It does.
It's a reminder that we can learn a lot about a culture
Yeah.
by exploring its legal system,
Absolutely.
even if we're not lawyers or legal scholars.
And I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity
Yeah.
to learn even more.
To explore further.
Yeah, whether it's about Philippine law
Yeah.
or other legal systems around the world.
It's about embracing that lifelong journey
Yes.
of learning and discovery.
Always seeking those hidden connections
Yeah.
that make our world so rich and complex.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to sign off.
I think so too.
Until next time, happy exploring.